Vicky Neville is just one of the many nurses who's made a massive sacrifice this year. She cut short her maternity leave to go back on the front line and join her colleagues at the intensive care unit at Warrington Hospital at the height of the pandemic. Vicky has written a very moving account about her struggle fighting that battle. And of course, Vicky, it was a battle that you didn't always win. Good morning to you and all of your colleagues in the intensive care units around the country must be the most relieved that finally the vaccine is being rolled out.
Well, it's a light at the end of the tunnel, isn't it? So for us, we can just sort of see some sort of closure to this horrific year, really. I personally think of my partner's great-grandmother that we can actually finally see, Leo's great-grandmother. That thought is just brilliant to see her.
Vicky, you wrote this extraordinarily moving piece for the Nursing Times. It went viral. I bet you're amazed about the attention it got. You're 34, you've been a nurse for 10 years, and for the last 5 years, intensive care nurse at Warrington Hospital in Cheshire. Your son was born last year, and you thought you'd take 9 months off to bond with him and make memories, as you put it, and looking forward to Christmas, being able to wear your engagement ring and so on. And then you gave all that up to go into battle. No other word to describe it, really, when COVID erupted. Tell us about that decision, first of all, about what compelled you to give up the security of being at home with your new baby and go and really risk your life to save others.
Well, it's about the unit. I know how busy my unit is on a normal sort of a weekly basis. So when I started to see the requests for staff to come in and help, it made me obviously feel like I needed to do my part. Obviously, I've got experience with ventilators. I seen how sick these patients were getting. It just made me feel like, I needed to do my bit. I think as a nurse, you automatically think, you need to help. And it was that impulse to help. Obviously, it would have been amazing to spend that time with Leo. But what could we do? We was in a lockdown. Leo and me would have been at home, and I just would have felt useless seeing my colleagues struggle and seeing all these patients who were increasingly, getting sicker sort of by the week. A lot of my colleagues were shielding. So I already knew that they were going to be at a deficit in staff numbers. So it was my sort of...
You had a moment, Vicky, which you describe in very emotional detail. And it just involved one of your patients who was sadly losing his battle with COVID. He was only 57, I think. He was a young man, relatively. And his wife was unable to come and see him because she had COVID and wasn't able to come and see her husband as he died. And you then spent the last hours of this man's life with him.
Yeah, so obviously, I'm speaking on behalf of all my colleagues. We've all nursed someone. We've all got stories. Everyone I work with. He was 57. He's the same age as my mum. I rang his wife, and she told me she had COVID, which is part of our policy. We can't allow anyone into the hospital with COVID. We do try to fit test our relatives if we can. If a patient is obviously critically ill or in the last hours of their life, so we can obviously facilitate them to see them. But that lady obviously couldn't come in, and so I obviously made sure that I was with him so he wasn't alone.
And Vicky, this is one of the roles that you and your team have had to play, isn't it? Is not just caring for people, trying to save their lives, giving them care in their last moments, but you are effectively their substitute family at that moment, aren't you? In a way that I'm sure is unique this year because of the infectiousness of this virus.
Yeah, so obviously, my thoughts are that if it was my mum and I wasn't able to go and see my mum, I'd love to, the thought of someone being with my mum, the thought of your mum or your dad or your loved one being on their own in their last hours of their life is awful. It's one of the other sides of this disease that we've been kind of faced with for the last 8 months. I personally couldn't leave that man. I couldn't, how could I obviously speak to his wife knowing that he died on his own? That's just not what we do. Our role is to be nurses. We're nurses, to make people better, but part of our job is to be there in the last hours of their lives, the last minutes.
Vicky, what's your message to people who still don't want to take this virus seriously, who perhaps are ignoring the rules, just going about normal life? What do you say to them?
Oh, it's frustrating. It's really, really frustrating. You know, I go to work every day. I wear PPE. I work with my colleagues who are exhausting, breaking down on shift, who are, you know, really poorly, picking up extra shifts, and the momentum of that is just going. And then you hear that someone's had a big party or broke, you know, the rules that we were given. And the rules were there to try and prevent us from going under, you know. But my unit has been heavily hit. We're one of the trusts that has been really, really escalated. We have been at full capacity at times. So our staff are struggling, you know, from you know, all areas of the hospital, not just intensive care. Our A&E is overwhelmed, our wards are overwhelmed. We've overspilled from one respiratory ward into almost 4 wards full of COVID patients who don't actually get to ICU. So the hospital does have high numbers still. And obviously, you know, that is a factor that we need to obviously remember that.
And you've had to call that poor lady who couldn't come and see her husband when she knew he was dying, and you had to call her and tell her that her husband had died. I mean, I can't even imagine what that must be like, that kind of conversation.
Oh, it's awful. It's probably one of the worst conversations that you'd ever have to make. You know, I hope I did what I could, you know, what I could say was right to her in that moment. But all I could offer her was that I was with him.
You know what, Vicky? I think that was an amazing thing that you did. I think it's extraordinary what you all do. I think what you've had to go through this year, people working on these COVID units, is beyond imagination, and it's ongoing now. I know that. Thank you for what you wrote. It was incredibly powerful, and thank you for all your ongoing work and that of all your colleagues and everyone in the NHS. My God, we've relied on you like never before this year, so keep up the great work.
And Vicky, can I ask, before we let you go, do you know when you're getting the vaccine?
No, I don't. I don't know when we will get it, but I can only just say, you know, I'm grateful to those who are having it. You know, I'm happy that they are getting it. So get it when we get it.
Yeah.
Good luck to you, Vicky. Thank you for coming on.